That year honestly had a lifetime of memories.
Every race weekend, it was like a miraculous save from something, and it was a different thing every week. It was incredible.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Grid with me, Tom Clarkson. We've done something a little different this week, because I haven't got one special guest like normal, I've got four, and the glue that links the Fab Four is that not only do they all work at Mercedes, they've all been with the Brackley-based team since the beginning. And I'm not talking about 2009, when Mercedes bought Brawn Grand Prix. I'm not even talking about Honda. I'm talking about the beginning of British-American racing in the late 90s.
They said he might never win a Grand Prix. He's done it! Jenson Button wins the Hungarian Grand Prix. Get in there!
Get in there, Jenson. Fantastic. Well done. Mix one, pick up rubber. Awesome job. Unbelievable.
We are the champions, my friends! We are world champions! World champions! Woo!
Hamilton crosses the line to win the Formula One title of 2020. Lewis Hamilton reaches the summit and becomes a seven-time world champion.
BAR was a start-up company, a team that was built from the ground up ahead of making its Formula One debut in 1999. And these four guys, the fabulous Brackley Boys as I like to call them, were there then or shortly afterwards, and they're still there now more than 20 years later. So take a bow, Ron Meadows, Andrew Shovlin, Simon Cole and James Vowles, all of them top guys. They remained loyal to the team when it morphed from BAR into Honda, and they stood firm when Honda pulled out at the end of 2008 and Ross Brawn came to the rescue. And this quartet now forms the pit wall at Mercedes, Ron as sporting director, Shov as trackside engineering director, Simon as chief engineer trackside, and James as motorsport strategy director. Theirs is a fascinating tale, an emotional roller coaster of extreme highs and the lowest of lows, and the one constant throughout is the bond between them. As you're about to hear, they're like brothers. We recorded this just before that incredible season-opening win in Bahrain, when they all played an integral part in helping Lewis Hamilton defeat Max Verstappen's much-fancied Red Bull. I really hope you enjoy our conversation.
Hi, I'm Ron Meadows. I started with the Brackley team in October 97, and my initial role was to build the factory. So I didn't really have a title because there was no HR department. I am now the sporting director for the race team.
I'm Andrew Shovlin. Everyone just calls me Shov though. And when I started in October, it was 1998, and I was in the vehicle dynamics department, which there were two of us who were doing the vehicle dynamics back then. And now I'm trackside engineering director.
I'm Simon Cole, and I started at the end of 2001 as a test engineer, so going testing every couple of weeks, mostly in Spain. And I am now the chief engineer trackside.
I'm James Vowles. I started also at the end of 2001. The role, I think, was data acquisition engineer back then. It was sort of a link between electronics projects and race engineering. And my title now is motorsport strategy director.
Guys, you've all been here ages, but let's start with the present. Let's talk about Mercedes now in 2021. What makes this team so special? Sure.
That's quite a difficult one, really. I think a lot of it is sort of the culture that we've been working to build up over the last number of years. And that work started in around 2013, where we realised the team had had so many different owners and faces, and we had a bit of an identity crisis. And with Mercedes fully on board for the future, it was this opportunity to kind of build a culture here from the ground up. And a lot of effort went into that, but we were kind of deciding what sort of team do we want to be and what do we want the values to be. And it's just a genuinely nice place to work, and that's why I think we all love being here. It's a lot of fun, but even when it's tough, we're all looking after each other, and we just enjoy every day of it.
Simon, how much difference does stability make? Because it went through quite a lot of change of ownership from BAR to Honda to Brawn, finally to Mercedes. Now you've got the stability and as Shov says, the cultural change. Did the stability make a difference to you guys on the ground?
It certainly does, and I think it's our greatest strength is the fact that we've got a very stable core to the organisation, and we've worked with each other for a number of years, and even the people who have come more recently are fitting into that sort of stable core of individuals, and we know utterly that we can rely on our colleagues around us and who do the majority of the graft back in Brackley.
So James, when Merck took over at the end of 2009, could you have imagined that you would have won 102 races just 11 years later?
No, I don't think anyone would have, within our organisation, have believed that. It's a common story, it's out there, but there was an offsite where we discussed at one point what we should achieve, and it felt guilty even suggesting to win one championship, let alone multiple championships. This is a team that came from success in 2009, but we also knew at the end of that year things were tough. Other teams were faster than us. So to have the perception that you would then go on to do what we've done, it was unbelievable back then.
It got worse before it got better as well.
Wait, but Shov, that's an interesting point. Why did it get worse before it got better?
I think a lot of it was we were trying to, we had an objective that kind of came with Mercedes coming in, that we were there to win championships. But ultimately, we just didn't have the resource to compete with the big teams at the time, Red Bulls and Ferrari and McLaren and people. And it was Toto who, when he arrived, who actually said, your objective's to win a championship, but your budget's the same as Williams, and theirs is to finish fifth. And it was really, getting it in line, but also there was, a lot of learning that we did. And in the Brawn year, we started work on that car, that 2009 car, very early. We had a head start aerodynamically in terms of the regulations, but we were slipping back through that whole season. We weren't the quickest car at the finish, and the effects of that you saw in 2010 and onwards.
Ron, can we take it further back? How unrecognisable to 1997, October 97, well, I suppose you were still building then. Let's take it to 99. How unrecognisable is the team today to that one that embarked on that first championship in 99?
Well, the initial business plan when I was building the site was for 250 people. And I was trying to think what department. I'd never built a factory before, and I was trying to figure out who worked in what department, because I'd come from IndyCar, which was 50-odd people. So I was asking, as people were arriving, well, how many will work in your department? And how many seats do you think we'll need in the design office? And what machinery do we need to buy? But the business plan was 250, but by the end of year one, we were 250. And by the end of year 3, we were 450. So it soon grew.
So who employed you, Ron? Was it Adrian Reynard?
Adrian and Rick approached me at an IndyCar race and said, we've got this project that might be happening with BAT. Couldn't explain any more. And I was having to make a decision whether I was going to come back to the UK anyway. And when they said that, I just had a leap of faith and said, well, I'm going to come back to the UK anyway. And my season ended in September and I started in October.
You were learning on the job, is that right? Because you'd been running Formula 3000 teams, you'd been running the Walker team, as you say, in IndyCar, but this was a whole step into the unknown, is that right?
Yeah, it was. To be honest, I was never someone who aspired to be in Formula 1. It always seemed like quite a big teams involved, and you were a bit more of a number. I couldn't have been further from the truth, because people are so busy in their individual departments, but the cars are so complex compared to the current cars, whether it's 3000 or F2. So it's not that you just turn up and do your little bit. You're involved in lots of different departments, and you do make a difference. Everybody makes a difference at Brackley, whether you're the cleaner in the hydraulics room or whether you're James Allison making all the big technical decisions. Everyone can stop the car.
So didn't plan on working in Formula 1. Here we are 23 years later. You're still there and still loving it.
I am still loving it. My plan was to never travel. When I came back, I said, okay, I'll do the factory. I'll find myself a little corner to hide in for the next 5 or 6 years, then go and do something else. But the first year with BAR was 99, I believe. Didn't go so well. I think the car was reasonably quick, but very unreliable. And in those days, you only scored points in the top 6. And I think they finished 7th on several occasions. I think at one time they promised it was like a 10 grand bonus if we score a point. It might as well made it 10 million, because it didn't look like it was ever going to score one. And By the third race of 2000, things hadn't improved and they were struggling with staff, and they asked me would I be prepared to travel. And it was all looking quite shaky, to be honest, because BAT weren't happy with the results. So I said I will do 3 races and see how we get on until you find someone who really wants to do the job. And that was 20 odd years ago and many hundreds of races.
You and Shov have been here since the beginning. What did you guys make of Adrian Reynard's claim that you were going to win your first race? Because Reynard had won in every formula they'd contested. Formula Ford, Formula 3, Formula 3000. They'd won their first race, even in IndyCar as well. What did you make of that claim about Formula One?
I'm not sure it was a claim. I think he was asked the question, where do you think you want to be? Or, what's your ambition? And he said, well, we'd like to try and win in our first season. And someone took that as, he said he's going to win his first race.
I was straight out of university, and I think I believed it, actually. So I'm a little bit wiser now. But I must admit, it was quite a shock when you realised how hard it was. And even as Ron said, getting that thing to finish a race. I think we were testing in Manicourt in the middle of the year before we got the thing to even do a race distance in testing. And basically, you had to assemble an entire car's worth of brand new parts and then just cross your fingers.
Villeneuve qualified 11th at the first race, and I think he ran as high as 3rd in Spain that year. So it was quick, but unreliable.
I remember the first test day we did, and it went down the main straight of Barcelona, and we said, where's the rear wing gone? So I think the engine cover fell off and took off the rear wing. That was in the first day.
So how would you guys sum up the BAR era?
It's difficult. I mean, it was one of those that you put into the character building category, and we've got quite a lot of years that we put into the character building category. There were good bits of it, and you think in the second year, I think we'd finished 5th in the championship, and we were tied on points with Benetton, who finished 4th. At the time, you were the aspirations of BAT, who were backing the team, were bigger than that, because they wanted to be right at the front. But it's quite an achievement when you look back on it to in year 2 to be finishing top 5 in the championship, and I think the year after that was the first podium in 2001, and scoring points was difficult when you only got them in the top 6.
Is Formula One harder now than it was back then?
Work-wise hours, I think it's easier, and because there's a lot of races. But the testing back then was the killer. You were testing all the time, and there was no curfew. So every night you were there till very late and getting 5-6 hours sleep. So I think the issue is that we're getting older, so it's hard to separate one from the other.
You were testing and racing, Shov.
Yeah.
Ron, testing and racing.
Not all tests, but most.
And then when you guys, Simon and James, came in 2001, travelling or not travelling?
I was travelling, but I'd left that year. I left the World Rally Championship because I wanted to travel less, a bit like Ron, and ended up doing a test every 2 weeks in Spain. It was really grueling, flipping hard work, but it was a really interesting challenge. And I think that's changed massively. The removal of testing from the pit lane, nobody would want to go back to that. It was hard work, and we're not all that sure always why we were doing it.
And are there many parallels between the World Rally Championship and Formula One, or was it like a completely new sport?
It's completely different, but it's also really hard work. So people in motorsport tend to thrive on that sort of lack of sleep and long hours and lots of travel, especially when you're young. I'm finding it a little more challenging now, but it was totally different, and I'm very privileged to have done both, as is Ron actually, but I find the variety fascinating to compare them. I still draw on the deep reserve of anecdotes when we get down to the bar in the evenings.
Now, James, data acquisition, I imagine, was a completely different ball game in 2001 compared to now. Can you put some numbers on that?
I mean, data generally has grown exponentially year on year. So you would be at a handful of channels back in the early 2000s, 50 or so in the base. I think we're now at 50,000, 60,000 to put it in context. But everything in the world of data has just grown each year. I'd probably say the last 2, perhaps not as much of a pattern as it was the last 15 before then. But it's not just the data that's grown in terms of quantity. We actually both understand how to use it and process it. as you can imagine, 50,000 channels of data. How do humans go through that? So there's more techniques in place to be able to do that. There's also more humans to look at it as well. But also the quality of the data is actually much, much better now. There were questionable, exactly as Simon said, when we were testing back in, I started traveling in 2003 a bit and then started doing tests and races in 4. But exactly as the guy said, you were just pounding around the track and generating a lot of information, a lot of the time unsure of what you were really getting out of it. And that's completely different now.
And strategy back then?
Well, this is so strategy, when I first started, obviously I wasn't in it, but there was no race strategy engineer in 2001. It didn't exist as a task. It was you would talk about it on an evening before the race and say, should we do a 1-stop, 2-stop? And then that was basically the discussion point. There was an Excel spreadsheet, I think, from memory that sort of roughly told you what to do. It wasn't formalized. It wasn't even believed to be a strong part of what's required for the race weekend. Car performance was everything, then reliability, and strategy wasn't a part of it. So one of the areas I got into quite early on, it was 2002 for the first time, was how could we apply a little bit more science to it? Because it was a domain that no one really had touched. It was freedom to be able to do what we wanted. So we started developing tools and systems that allowed us to really make more informed decisions and actually understand what's behind it. And I think those all came online about 2003, 2004 time. And they became, or they are now, an integral part of what we do. But my sort of progress was more doing testing and doing a bit of engineering, coming here to the track, doing the third driver engineering. So back in 2004 and 2006, we had a third driver. And it was paving the way, or paying, if you like, for me to also do the strategy at the same time, because it wasn't considered a full-time role. And then around about the 6th time, I think we migrated it to a role that really requires its own basis, and then built the team from there. And the team's just expanded year on year. And again, I would say the amount of information we have in that world is exponential growth. If I look to see what we were using back in 2006, it's frankly embarrassing compared to now. And I'm sure we'll look back again in 10 years' time and think the same thing.
Don't go anywhere, because there's plenty more of this tale of teamwork, innovation, and survival to come. But first, here's a message for any of you small business owners, or those of you looking to grow your own business with the right people at your side, just like those Brackley boys. LinkedIn Jobs can help you do that for free. LinkedIn is an active community of professionals with more than 30 million members in the UK. Post a job with targeted screening questions, and they'll quickly get your role in front of qualified candidates, helping you to find the right person faster than ever. Tap into their useful resources and get help crafting those ever-important interview questions, manage job posts, and contact candidates with ease. Getting started with LinkedIn Jobs is simple because now everything is fully accessible straight from your mobile device. So when your business is ready to make that next hire, find the right person with LinkedIn Jobs. And now you can post a job for free. Just visit linkedin.com/grid. Again, that's linkedin.com/grid to post a job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So guys, last question really about the BAR era involves Monaco 2005, because you weren't there. And I just want to know, as young guys...
I was there.
I was there as well.
Just what, as spectators helping out?
There was still, I remember doing a Michelin tire meeting with Pascal and just being there to collect various bits of data, but no, obviously.
James, but as young guys, hungry to race, you had that whole controversy around Imola. We don't need to get into that now, other than the repercussions were that you guys were banned for a race. And how did that feel?
Felt like you were sort of naughty boys a bit.
You were on the naughty stack, weren't you? Yeah.
There's only 2 occasions in the last 20 whatever years where I've had a Sunday dinner while watching a Grand Prix. That was one of them. But yeah, it did feel very much like we were on the naughty step.
But did you guys feel throughout that era that you were marked men, or the team was marked? But right from the outset, with the livery drama in '99, you wanted to run different liveries on each car, and the FIA got involved and said you can't do that. And then, of course, there was this incident in 2005, and just, I don't know, did you always feel that the crosshairs were on you in anything that you did as a team?
I've never felt like that, to be honest. I think the FIA or whoever's, you believe is coming after you, I think that they're generally trying to do it for the right reasons, and we probably didn't abide by the rules for the livery at the time and didn't ask the right questions and got punished. But no, I've never felt at any point that we're in a line of sight.
And Ron, tell us about the airline seats that were being built at Brackley? Because you've already said that the site was for 250 people, and before you even went racing, you were more than double that. How did you then have the capacity to build airline seats as well?
We didn't. That was part of Reynard Racing Cars. The site at Brackley was the actual race team. The F1 race team was just over the bridge, which was about 2 acres of the site. There was another 10 acres, which was supposed to be building Indy cars for the next 10, 15 years. But I think they produced a bit of a turd that season. And
I've never heard a racing car being described like that.
And they failed to sell any cars the next year, so they struggled. So they had to keep the guys busy by making airplane seats and doing whatever they could to get back on their feet.
Okay, look, let's move on to the Honda era. Of course, it comes fully under their control in 2006. You've been using their engines since 2001. What difference was felt on the ground when it came under full Honda ownership?
It's difficult to know where to start with it. So for the starting point, because we'd had a relationship that was growing year on year prior to that, it wasn't that it was a sudden step change from one day to the next, particularly. It just grew in its nature. But what came with it was something that grew in intensity across the next 3 years. Honda have their way of working. It's the way that's successful for them. And truth be told, if we knew how to work culturally with them by taking the experience we gained across that and start again, I think we would have had a stronger relationship overall. They're two different cultures brought together at the same time. We had our way of working, they had their way of working. And it took a long, long time to understand how to get the most out of both parties. The way the relationship actually continued was a little bit of a breakdown. They were actually in many ways mimicking or trying to do the chassis work on their side, believing that they could do a stronger job than we could, in tandem and in parallel to ourselves. And as you can imagine, that at some point will break down the relationship, which is what happened over time. In terms of what they could do with the power units, with the engines, back then, it was extraordinary. We had engines that, not every year, but every other year, near enough, were excellent. They really were near enough towards the top end of the class. Now, that deteriorated as we went towards the end of that agreement, but early on in 4 and 6, those engines were very, very good. What was difficult was the communication failure between the two sites. So I remember a particular test that I did where we were at Monza, and exactly as the guys said, you're fatigued, you're exhausted. We went there for a week just pounding around the track. It was Anthony driving, I think, from memory. And it was the third car that I was working on that Friday. We went out, we did near enough 1.8 kilometers, and the engine detonated. This is an engine that we had done thousands of kilometers the week prior. And so it didn't make much sense anymore. What we did is we didn't send out the two race drivers. We changed the engine in the car that I was working on. We went back out, and I think we made near enough half a lap or several laps, and that was it before it detonated again. And what happened is the communication was a fantastic sign of it. We asked multiple times, is this the same engine, to make sure we understood where we were. And the answer back every time was, it's the same engine. Now, in reality, it wasn't. Everything had changed. It's an example of the communication breakdown that happened during that period. It happened time and time again, and it sort of shows the lack of trust, I think, to a certain extent between both organizations. It shows how one wanted to work in its own side way against us. It's things that I think taught us not to behave in that way or not to have that relationship with the engine supplier going forward. And the relationship that we are now with HPP, despite the fact that we're on two different sites, is one entity working together. And I think it really does stem from getting things wrong early on in that relationship with Honda.
Really interesting. But of course, there were good moments, as you say, James. Jenson's victory, Hungary 2006. Yeah, given everything, must have been very sweet.
That was an incredible race. But that was still when BAR were involved, wasn't it? It was 2007 was when it became entirely Honda, and that was the last year, which sort of felt. It was very nice to have got the race win after it had taken so long, and also before we'd won the first race, there were lots of occasions where we thought we might win, and then invariably it was where Ferrari were having a bad day and they just turn everything up and sort of gobble you up, and they're back in front by the finish. But yeah, that was one of those races that you'll never forget.
The 2004 car, second in the Constructors' Championship in what was the team's 5th season in Formula One. On paper looks good. Do you look back with an element of frustration that you didn't win a race that year? Did it deserve to? Was the car good enough?
I think the car did, and I think the opportunity was Indianapolis. That was the race. I think there was a big crash with, I'm trying to remember who it was it Ralph who had a big crash just coming onto the start-finish straight? and we should have come in the pits, but we stayed out. And I think Taku then inherited the lead when Michael came in, and he drove very, very slowly through the wreckage. Jenson was stuck behind him screaming on the radio about why is he going so slow. And in the meantime, Ferrari were able to do a pit stop and popped out, and they still had the lead. And that was the opportunity, because the car was working well strategically. It could have all gone right for us. And I think, to be honest, we just weren't. There was a bit of kind of stage fright where you got up front in a race, and we weren't really ready for it. And I think there was another moment at Monaco that year where we thought, Jenson could have won it, but there was a safety car, and we managed to get him in, and Trulli had stayed out. We thought he was going to get picked up by the safety car, but the safety car was slow leaving the pits, and he went by. And again, but I think it's just, you have a lot of ones where you think that's the day, and by the time we got to Budapest in 2006, you kind of didn't really let yourself believe it until we got the thing over the finish line.
So let's fast forward to December 2008. Honda announced they're going to withdraw from Formula One. On my side of the fence, it was a shock. Was it a shock to you guys, Simon?
Yeah, it certainly was. We knew we were in quite big trouble, because before even the discussion about Honda leaving, there was a lot of discussion about testing being cancelled, which was obviously my thing, was the fact that I was track testing every 2 weeks and didn't really get so involved in the racing. And Ross called me to say there's a discussion going on because of the recession that everyone was experiencing, that there was this discussion about cancelling the testing, and that was obviously going to affect me even before the doubts around Honda staying in. And then when we started to see Honda having to commit to redundancies at Swindon and around Europe, it was pretty clear that they weren't going to put up with giving us money at the same, they couldn't stomach the experience of paying for us at the same time as they were laying people off, quite rightly.
So Ron, how did you guys find out? Who told you? Was the team gathered together in the race bays? How did it work?
The senior management at that point was about 8 of us, and we were called in on December 1st to the boardroom, where we were told.
Did you know what the meeting was about prior to going in?
No, senior director of Honda was there, and with Nick Fry, and they told us, but we couldn't tell the staff. They were going to be told on the 5th of December. For some reason, I'm not too sure, but there was some good reason for not doing it, so we had to sit with that on our conscience for 4 or 5 days, so we struggled with that. When we eventually told everybody, it was a big shock to the whole workforce. Now, we realised we were underperforming, but normally with F1, you have a couple of years of underperforming, then a couple of good years, and a couple of bad years, and you bounce around. Don't forget, they'd only owned the company for 2 years. They were with us for more, but they only owned it for 2 years.
Well, and they invested very generously.
Yes.
They showed that there was no sign of this coming from the point of view. They weren't hesitant in investing in the infrastructure on site. They were very generous. And
the
looked
wind
like
tunnel,
they were in a long-term.
The wind tunnel had just
commitment.
been built, and that was a state-of-the-art wind tunnel that at the time was as good as anything that any other team had. I think they were also building one in Japan, so a duplicate version of this. So Simon says the money was flowing really freely right up until the point that they decided to stop.
And what was the message to the workforce? Go and get another job, or we are trying to salvage the situation, hold your horses?
Very much the latter. But one of the interesting things that Ron just reminded me of was really at that time, on those days, we had about probably 30% of the workforce in the, upstairs in the design office. 30% of the workforce were Japanese. We had a massive Honda presence in the factory, and the next day they went home, and they were friends and colleagues, and they just vanished overnight. So the site felt empty within 24 hours of the announcement. But the message was very much, we're going to try and rescue this, but we've got no idea how at the moment. Bear with us.
And James, how much confidence did you have that the team was going to be saved, or did you guys start hunting around? Any job interviews down the road kind of thing?
The thing that impressed me the most is the entire workforce got their heads down and kept getting on with it without the knowledge of what was going to come through. Ross was very good. I can vividly remember this image in my mind now. He was on the stairs in the Brackley race bays and just rallying up the troops, saying, "Are we going to fight? Are we going to fight for this?" And it was a moving moment whereby the entire workforce was clearly there to continue going racing, and we would do what it takes to get ourselves back at the track. Now, many of us couldn't actually control that individually, but it also meant that our hearts were set on trying to keep going with this team. So I'm sure it would have been wrong to not see if other opportunities came your way. But actually, I think the actual amount of people that left was minute or none.
How conscious were you, Shov, of the progress being made on the 2009 car? Did you know that there was an absolute humdinger of a racing car in gestation?
We knew it would be a decent car because we put so much effort into it, and we started so early. I think it was the year before 2008 at Hockenheim, which was about mid-season, was the point that we said, right, we're just going to forget about 2008, we'll focus on the new rules in 2009. And that was also a year where there was a tight battle at the front of the field, which is another thing that I think made that possible, because I think it was Ferrari, McLaren, and it would have either been Renault or Williams that were still fighting for it. So we were quietly working on the car, but really the only time we started to think this is properly quick was when we didn't go testing, and everyone was at a test. I think it was actually in Portimao, and there was a Toro Rosso there, and it was their old car. They hadn't gone to the new rules, and everyone else had the new rules, and that was a reference for us. That was the quickest thing there by miles, and we were thinking that we'd pretty much recovered all the performance and we'd be as fast as our car. So you were sort of going around it and then thinking, well, hang on a minute, this means that we're nearly 2 seconds quicker than anyone else. And then you think, we must have got our sums wrong. Bear in mind, we were adding in a decent step on the engine, because going from the Honda to the Mercedes engine was quite a gain. But on that kind of paper analysis, we sort of walked away thinking either we've got a very quick car or we're not very good at doing the maths. But also when you looked at them, you thought they all looked like our car did 6 months previously, where the front wing shapes were just very much the boxes defined by regulation, but nothing prepared you for when you started running it in Barcelona and you were like, oh my God, this looks properly fast.
Shop, we'll come to that in a minute, but Ron, in terms of the engine, was it ever discussed that you were going to run the Honda that had been prepared for 2009, or was it always going to be a change of engine to Mercedes?
It was always going to be a change, and we all believed that we were going to go Ferrari for the first couple of weeks. It's obvious, Ross Brawn, Ferrari, we need an engine. They want to give us an engine.
Ferrari did want to give you an engine, did they?
We believe so.
Right.
We were certainly talking to them, and then I think we were told on the 23rd or 24th of December that we were going Mercedes.
Was there sort of panic across the design office then? Oh my God, it's the 24th of December, it's Christmas tomorrow. No, Christmas is cancelled. We've got to get this engine in the back of the car.
I don't think anybody's done that in the history of Formula One, or certainly not in the last 20 years, to get a car together and to put the wrong engine in it in about 6 or 8 weeks was an unbelievable experience. It was an incredible job, and obviously we weren't really involved in that. We just watched, and the DO got on with it, and it was stunning.
And how much of a compromise was it? If you'd had a year's build-up, would it have been a very different solution?
No. If you looked at it now, you wouldn't be able to say what the compromise was. It was very impressive.
And let's not lose sight that the workforce didn't know they had a job. So these guys were putting in the hours, hoping that we could create this car and generate some sponsorship to keep going.
Right, so the Mercedes engine deal was done without you knowing that the team was going to be saved?
Yes. There was talks ongoing, and it felt positive, but it wasn't a done deal.
No, it wasn't clear whether it was going to be Ross's team run out of his own slush fund, or whether it was going to be sold to somebody. But we just thought, well, if we haven't got a car, we definitely haven't got a saleable asset, and it's nobody's team. So we just got on with, the DO did, as I say, a fantastic job of getting on and producing what turned out to be an absolutely fantastic car, and an absolute fairy tale.
Shov, talk us through that first test at Barcelona then.
Well, it's a long time ago, but the one of the interesting bits was we actually started that test on a set of tyres that were 50 laps old, having driven around the school circuit at Silverstone, which was it's not really a place to take an F1 car, but it was cheap. So that was where we did the shakedown. And so the first times we did, that was still way quicker than anyone else, were on this knackered old set of tyres. And I remember Jenson coming in and saying, balance doesn't feel very good, and pointing out just how much quicker he was than everyone else, which he actually then unstrapped, got out the car, came to look at the timing monitors because he didn't believe it, got back in, And then we went out on new tyres, and again you were seeing this gap that was like in the seconds, which you don't really get in your motor racing career normally. And then they started deleting our times because the teams were complaining that we'd obviously cut the chicane. But there was this sort of dawning realisation by about 10 o'clock in the morning that we were way ahead. I think even the other teams were kind of thinking, well, even if they're running light and they've taken all the ballast off, they're still quick. And then you look around the garage and there were, some people smiling. A lot of them were on Paddy Power and
there wasn't many people in the main garage because they all had the back place in their bets.
And a number of them got, I think, 150 to 1 to win the championship. So they did all right on that if you could get a few quid on it. But it was interesting, and it was just the gap was the incredible thing. But it just came about from the fact that we had this head start on the regulations where everyone else was busy with the car from the year before, and we were flat out on it. And I think we made some good decisions conceptually on the car and in terms of the layout, but the development time was just greater than anyone else.
Jenson Button's a winner again. Brawn GP are winners on their first race appearance, and not only that, it's a 1-2 finish. Button from Barrichello. The smiles are on Ross Brawn. What a result, and history too.
Sensational job, Jenson. Fantastic. Well done. You deserve it.
And having been through the winter that you'd been through, how emotional was it actually to know that you're sitting on such a good car?
It was really all about the emotion. I think then, when we went to Melbourne was the time when we announced the redundancies there. So it was, even that point where we went away racing, you knew that lots and lots of people back in Brackley were losing their jobs. But you'd come off this winter of not knowing whether you had a job, whether you were going to be able to pay the mortgage, and to kind of get dropped from that situation straight into this sort of fairy tale of the fastest car out there and winning race after race. I remember by the fourth race I was coming back on the aeroplane and picked up one of the papers, and it sort of said Jenson Button, we won the third of the 4 races in the opening part of the season, and it was odd because it just kind of dawned on you that we're actually doing this. And then you realise this is the big shot at the championship, and it's kind of it's in all of our hands as to whether we're successful or whether we let it slip through our fingers.
It was a very emotional time because prior to those tests we did, we had to announce the redundancies of the people who weren't going to stay with the team, and it was a fairly high percentage. And the guys on the test team who went on the itinerary for Melbourne sort of knew their fate without even speaking to them. So you had to go and speak to them before you could send the itinerary out, which went out the day before we actually went off to the test. It wasn't well scheduled. It was all last minute, and it was certainly winning Melbourne. And we had a 1-2. We certainly didn't deserve a 1-2 because I think we were first and fourth because we had 2 shocking pit stops with two bad ones with Rubens, one with Jenson. But I think Seb and Kubica hit each other in the last few laps, which allowed Rubens to come from 4th to 2nd. So it was a 1-2 fairy tale.
How many people were on the staff in 2009?
I think it was about 400.
400 something. I think we lost two. I think we maybe lost 300.
Yeah, that's about right. 450, I think.
We've got plenty more incredible insights on the way after this short message from Free Trade. Free Trade is on a mission to make investing simple for everyone. Investing is one of the best ways to grow wealth over the long term, and with Free Trade, you can start investing from just £2 on their award-winning, simple-to-use trading app. There are no hidden fees, and unlike other brokers, they don't charge any commission fees, so you get to keep more of your profits. It's no surprise Free Trade has been the winner of the British Bank Awards 2 years in a row, 2019 and 2020, for Best Online Trading Platform. And don't forget, when you invest, your capital is at risk. The value of investments can go up as well as down, and you may receive back less than your original investment. Go to freetrade.io/grid, and if you register and fund your account, you'll get a randomly allocated free share worth between £3 and £200, such as Greg's, Rightmove or Apple. For more information, it's freetrade.io.
Come on, well done, awesome. Jenson, that was unbelievable, unbelievable, great job.
Oh, you have built me a monster of a car. You're an absolute legend. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this.
So you win 6 of the opening 7 races in 2009. And then everyone catches up and it all gets a bit more difficult in the second half of the season. James, how do you explain that?
I was going to go back on something Shov said, because it's interesting. For me, I was never thinking about the championship in that year. I was literally taking it race by race in the hope that if we win this race, more money will come, the car. Because I'm not sure it was 100% clear in my mind that we had the funds to continue to the end of the year successfully. We were being very careful on the income and the costs that we had. Even in Bahrain, when we came here, so other teams had been testing, I believe, in Bahrain that year, and we hadn't. I remember vividly, we were not fastest car here, just Toyota happened to put the wrong set of tyres on the car, and we did the right one. And it was bits like that. It wasn't actually very clear, apart from the first few races, that we had this stonking car that was going to trounce everyone. By the time we got towards Barcelona, it was pretty clear that our updates were very small relative to other people, and the gaps were closing in very quickly. And as we went through the year, we were having to take more and more risks in order to keep being at the front. The extreme being Monza, where we purposely, back then you had to qualify with your fuel on board, and we went for a one-stop. We put the cars 6th and 7th on the grid. All the cars in front of us were on a 2-stop, and we did it purposely because with a car like ours, where we didn't have a KERS unit in the car, so that's one difference to other teams. We didn't have that start performance benefit and some performance benefit from it. We knew we were going to drop back, but if we can run our own race, we had a good chance of doing it. And there were a number of occasions I can pick out through the year where we came through, but it was clear, as Shov said early on in this, that the trajectory of other teams was such that we were not going to be the fastest team, and indeed by the European season we weren't. We just had to hang on in there and pull all the results in we could.
I remember the crash at Spa being a low point.
That was the first time the car had been on the back of a low loader.
Yeah.
How many chassis? Is it true that Jenson raced the same chassis all season?
It's better than that. I think if Red Bull had crashed into us early on in the season, we would have been dead in the water.
Chassis 3 came along for Monaco. So all the races up until Monaco, we only had 2. We didn't have any spares.
So just out of interest, what would have happened if one of them had a big shunt on a Friday practice?
If we broke the top, you'd have run one car.
That would have been a one car, really? Wow.
Just to touch on this, I found this a great story. Just touch on the Melbourne pit stops. So the issue we had was refueling. Our normal refueler from previous years had left the team as part of the redundancies, and we wanted to keep him, but he decided he was going to go and be a plumber. So we got through Melbourne, realised we needed to make some change. So I called him, and he came along as a weekend warrior. He'd fly in Saturday night to do the fuel for a day rate, and then straight after the race go home and do his plumbing job for a fortnight, then come back again.
That's amazing. Have you ever experienced anything like that before in your career?
Not at this level of motorsport.
Not in Formula 1.
It's quite good value because it knocked about 8 seconds off the pit stops.
That year, not to labour on it, but it honestly had a lifetime of memories. Every race, something was there that you can... examples of that were in Bahrain, this very track, in fact. We had, obviously, I think it was the front flat back then, could actuate up and down. And we had huge problems with it. You could sort of put one side up and the other one would drop back down again. And I remember being here on the pit lane floor asleep because I was just exhausted, just fell asleep on the floor whilst they went through all the processes. But each race had its own unique set of memories that came with it that are embedded in all of us forever, and it won't change. And those feelings are extraordinary by comparison to most things.
You remember Bahrain, you reminded me that the car was on the end of the cooling curve and we'd run out of cooling capacity and we couldn't do 2 laps in qualifying without overheating. And I was talking to Nicola, who was doing our marketing for that year, and she was saying, "No, I don't understand what you're telling me." I'm saying, well, we can't do 2 laps. You don't understand, right? And she was saying, "Yeah, but what's qualifying going to look like?" And I said, "Well, we can do a lap. That's what it's going to look like." And it was amazing. And then luckily it was a night race and we were safe. But it was as James says, it was like that every race weekend. It was like a miraculous save from something, and it was different thing every week. It was incredible.
The other one is Malaysia, for example, when it rained. Our car would not have started. That steering wheel, when you lifted up and tipped it out, was full of water. No way were we moving anymore. I mean, there's just things that happened that you look back on and go, that just incredible set of sequences that allowed us to win where we won.
I thought I was trapped in a nightmare in Malaysia because it was raining so heavily you couldn't see. And I'd seen on telemetry that Jenson had come round the final corner, but we were looking for the car on the grid and we couldn't find it. And you thought, well, surely he's lined up with everyone else. But I think a bit of a pack had formed just out of the last corner and he stopped it, switched it off. And then everyone had moved their cars and he was so far down towards there that with the rain you couldn't see him. So there were a group of us running up and down the grid saying, where's the car? And everyone saying, I don't know, I can't find it. And it was the most bizarre moment because you think, this is properly like a nightmare. Because you think, where can he have gone? And it was also one of those races where everyone was spinning off into the gravel. And you were just wondering, has something happened? Has he gone off between the last corner and the grid? But yeah, eventually we found it. There was Ross running around on the grid with a set of tyres and a tyre trolley. Which you think, why has Ross got a set of tyres and a tyre trolley? But as James said, we were sort of sat there, unaware that the car would never have started. And then they said, right, the race won't go again because the light had got bad. Bit of a celebration, but it was just the weirdest race I've ever had.
But they came one after another, didn't they? And it was extraordinary.
The Monaco story where Jenson stopped in the wrong place and had to run down the pit straight. Just every weekend there was something new.
Did you tell him that he parked in the wrong place?
Shov told him, I briefed Shov, said, don't forget, we've got to come round. Shov told Jenson on the way round, he forgot, parked in the scrutineering bay, and then someone told him.
Made for good footage though, seeing him running down the track waving to the crowd.
It was great, and you know what it means to a driver to win Monaco, and it's nice. It's nice seeing that when someone wins it for the first time ever, because it is almost as big as a world championship to them.
And you guys must have felt all your Christmases had come at once that November, because not only do you seal both world championships, Mercedes buy the team.
That was fantastic, but at the time we were almost kind of a bit, are we actually good enough for this? And you were reflecting on what...
Sorry, Shov, you were still doubting yourselves having just won the world championship.
Yeah,
for what it's worth, I think we still doubt ourselves today. We have to be clear about it. I mean, it's a fierce competition out there, and we're fortunate to have an incredibly fast car. And if you don't keep questioning yourself, you become a bit complacent.
I think it was also just that Mercedes, last experience of being involved so closely with the team was McLaren, and everything was so flash and shiny, and they'd had a great period with them as a manufacturer, and we were an organisation then that was fairly threadbare, where we hadn't been investing in it. We didn't have any of the shiny stuff that they had, and we knew that the car had slipped back a bit. And reflecting on it, it was the investment that we subsequently made was absolutely required, but we didn't realise it at the time. There was a sort of weight of expectation that came with it, where you thought it's great that the future of the team is secure, but on the other hand, you were just worried that whether we'd do a good enough job to keep them.
And then when you sign Nico Rosberg and Michael Schumacher for the following season, that just ramped up the pressure even more.
Yeah, it did, and Michael coming to the team was a really big moment in the team's evolution, because you had this driver who knew what it took to win championships, who knew what the level had to be in Formula One, and it was a bit of a kind of wake up to us, because he really pushed the team to work hard to deliver, and it did cause us to take a step up.
And we were all just in awe of Michael. Even before we met him, it was like, oh, are we worthy of working with someone who's got so many world championships? And
it was a bit daunting, really, for me. When Ross used to talk about, Michael's going to come, he's going to change everything. You wait and see. I thought this could be interpreted in one of two ways, and I was slightly worried that it was going to be the way I didn't want. But he came and lived up to every expectation about the benchmark of professionalism, and helped us develop as a team no end.
Let's talk about Michael as a driver first. You were race engineering him in year one, Shov. What stood out about what he was doing in the car?
Just his ability to, find one thing that would deliver performance, or we'd say, well, this will get you 0.5 of a second. And he'd say, right, okay, I'll do that. What's next? And you'd say, okay, well, if you can do this as well at the same time, that's another 200ths. And there was a lot of this stuff with the KERS system then was fairly complicated for the drivers, but his ability to keep just adding and adding and adding, and he just wouldn't seem to get overloaded. And all he wanted was the feedback, tell me what I can do better. And it was really just that requirement that every lap he's wanting you to make him work and make him do more and find performance, and the kind of focus on the constant focus on the marginal gains. And it was just every bit of him as a driver was just like, I'll hoover up as much as I can in terms of performance and put it all together, and that's how I'll work.
He worked with the engineers as well in a way that we hadn't seen before, I don't think. The hours he put in the truck office between sessions and in winter testing and so on was new to us for sure.
But Simon, that's data analysis, or how was he working with the engineers that you hadn't seen before?
A lot of it was data analysis, but he was interested in everything, and he wanted to be part of every discussion about car setup and why are we doing the program this way around? Wouldn't it be better to do it that way around? And why do we need to do this? So he didn't sort of sit there and let us present a plan to him and then just try and execute it or get halfway through it and start complaining. He would just be part of making the program, part of understanding what we were trying to learn, and as I say, put in a fantastic amount of hours, and it really paid off because we started to then learn about how you involve drivers in, getting them to buy into a plan.
You've talked already about the lack of investment in the Brawn era, and when do you feel that the trajectory started going up? Was it before 2014? Did you start seeing signs of it prior to that?
I mean, from a performance point of view, I think Toto, when he arrived, which I think was 2012, and one of his assessments, I'm sure there were plenty where he thought we needed to be better, but the assessment that you won't be successful in this mission with the budget that you've got, and he just said, I'll go and speak to the board, leave that to me. And he was able to secure the funding to kind of build the foundation of what we've got today. But I'd say 2012, if you were watching it really closely, you could actually start to see some good decisions being made and strengthening the team in some really key areas. By 2013, we were well on the road to being a championship winning team. It was just, we still had quite a gap to Red Bull, and the problem is the results always kind of lag the good work that's going on, but you've got to give that good work time to come to fruition. And happily, we were given the time, and obviously the big step in 2014, a lot of that came from the power unit. 2014 came.
And 12 to 13, which you mentioned, was when we got started on that power unit. So I think we identified that the V8 days were numbered as well. It was obvious, and that the V6 was coming, and it came about, as you remember probably, as a variety of slightly strange and arbitrary decisions by different manufacturers as to what they wanted, but that's what we got. And we just got on with it and got started on that early, and for me that was an outstanding piece of work.
What a little start. Pole position. Well done, Michael. Fantastic. Well done.
James, what are your memories of Schumacher's pole lap at Monaco? Pole that wasn't pole because he then had a grid, he was carrying a grid penalty, wasn't he? But it was on the day pole position.
It's funny you mentioned that one. I was actually thinking about it as Shov was going through it. First of all, I think we all had a very personal connection with Michael. He knew every name of everyone in the garage, and to be completely truthful, some of us around this table may not know at some times, at all times, every name around the garage and may have got it wrong. He was incredibly good at knowing about your family, your life, your personal habits, and not because he was putting on an act, because he genuinely cared about everything that was in your life.
And you and Michael shared a passion for motorbikes as well.
Indeed. I had the pleasure of going out with him on track in 2 degrees at Paul Ricard, and we messed around on motorbikes for a day. That's a level of relationship, which also I hold with Lewis, but something you would not normally experience with a driver. Now, the reason why I gave you that is context to what it meant to me in Monaco. I was over the moon from him. I think it was one of the best laps he's probably ever done in his life to put that car on pole. But I was heartbroken, truly heartbroken for him, that this is a guy that we all wanted around this table and within the factory for him to win a race, because he deserved it, frankly, and he put so much effort into the team and so much of his life into the team that it was payback to him. And that was his opportunity, truthfully, that year. And I was heartbroken the fact that one race was where he dropped back. I felt for him. I still feel now that he didn't get all the results he deserved, given the amount he was putting into the team.
Well, and how he helped us improve. I think that's certainly my biggest regret, not seeing Michael win a race for us, because he was a different level of driver we'd ever worked with at that point.
Your biggest regret over the last 20 years, in the context of everything we're talking about now, is that Schumacher didn't win?
Yeah, at a racetrack, I really believe. We all wanted him to win. It didn't happen, and a couple of years later we couldn't stop winning. And he deserves some of that, because the reason we're winning today, a lot of it's down to him, because he made us better.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there a sense of regret that he didn't stay on for a little bit longer? I'm sensing a little bit.
The thing that wasn't perhaps picked up on before is one of the things that made him incredibly strong is actually something we've picked up on now, but he knew where he was weak and he accepted where he was weak and he tried to improve on that all the time. So he had shortcomings in terms of how he was able to drive the car relative to Nico, but he was very conscious and aware of that and doing what he could to remedy those areas. But there are areas which, in truth, part of it was age, where he wouldn't be able to find everything that was there. And I think he also knew that that was his time. I just wish he'd won a race, because one more year would have been a fantastic year for him, that's all.
Or if we got good sooner, that would have done
it as well.
Well, look, you say that by 2013 you had the basis of a world championship winning team. A bit like the end of 2008, did you know going into 2014 that you guys had an advantage and that you were going to be dominant?
I think we knew we'd put everything into it, and as Simon said, the work on the power unit started very early, and that was one of the things that Ross was actually adamant that we had to do well, because it was the big opportunity to kind of launch the team toward the front. But you only have a sense that you've done a good job. You can't affect the job that everyone else does, and it's a bit like here getting ready for testing for another season. You can think you've done a decent job, but you've got to see the other cars and see how they perform, and it's only at that stage that you start kind of ruling people out as being your competition. So it kind of came surprisingly slowly. I remember when we were testing that car here in Bahrain, and Nicky was worried that it wasn't quick enough, and he kept going on and on that we needed to try low fuel, we needed to try the softest tyres, and he was sort of badgering us for 2 days, and in the end we caved in. And I can't remember how much quicker we were than but we were on the top of the timesheets by quite a large margin. And then about 20 minutes later, he'd taken off in his plane and gone home. So it was, even then, it was probably quicker than we thought. But you put low fuel in and new tyres, and the drivers suddenly start going into qualifying mode, and you see what it's actually got.
You've given Toto credit for budget and just pushing things forward as soon as he came in. You mentioned Nicky Lauda. Just how much credit should be given to Nicky?
I mean, Nicky's a bit of the team that you can't ever replace, and culturally he was a big part of us. The one thing he didn't do was overanalyze, and so often us as engineers are prone to doing it, and it was great when he would just sum something up in about 10 seconds and you think, right, okay, we can stop that conversation. So he was just an instrumental part in shaping the team, and we'll always miss him.
He's exactly what we needed at the time, because he was so straightforward and so honest. Not brutally honest that he'd destroy you, but he'd just say it as he saw it, and he had lots of experience. We knew exactly what direction to go in.
He was somebody else that I was a bit nervous of his arrival, to be honest, because he had a hell of a reputation in the industry and outside it. But again, he turned up, and once you get comfortable with someone like that, you start to see how they work and how they think, and he was great. He became a great friend.
He was tough at first, and we thought he's been brought in to kind of decide who to fire, because he came along, I think, in 2012, but it was, Simon said, this relationship that sort of over time, the team grew to love Nicky and Nicky grew to love the team, and he was such a great part of the team's history.
The final part of our conversation's coming up right after this. So how did you choose which internet service provider to use? Well, no doubt we all do our research and choose the right package for us when it comes to broadband speeds and everything else. But one thing we aren't able to control is that internet service providers log your internet activity, and they can sell that data onto other big tech companies or advertisers who can use it for their own profit. So in order to protect my privacy, I make sure I protect all of my devices with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an app for your computer or smartphone that encrypts all of your network data and tunnels it through a secure VPN server so that your ISP cannot see any of your activity. You just download the app, tap one button on your device, and you're protected. And don't worry, it won't slow down your internet connection in the process. Stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech giants who mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with the VPN I trust to keep me private online. Visit expressvpn.com/grid. That is expressvpn.com/grid to get 3 months free. Go to expressvpn.com/grid right now to learn more.
They came into the race as championship favourites. It's Nico Rosberg who's going to confirm that favouritism, and he comes home to win the Australian Grand Prix for Mercedes, their 100th Mercedes-powered victory in the Formula One World Championship. Rosberg takes the season opener by a long, long way.
So 2014, there were 19 races. You started on pole 18 times and won 16 of them. Are there parallels between what you achieved that year with 2009?
No, I don't. Not for me. There were so many differences between those years. The first one in 2009, as I said, is imagine you had a survival mentality. You knew that you had to do well in order to have success later and have a team later. In 2014, we had the might of Mercedes behind us. We have Toto that's doing everything he can. And the culture, as Shov brought up very early on, was completely different within the team. You had this environment that there's no politics, there's no backstabbing. Every single part of the organization is contributing towards why you are there today. Whether in finance, HR, marketing, or engineering, made no difference. Every single person was working together. And they're just very different environments to compare to. The big thing in 2014 was, quite clearly, we had two drivers that wanted to win this championship at all costs, and the gloves were off. And here at this track was obviously symbolic in that way.
5 laps to go. Hamilton, our race leader. Rosberg in second, gaining all the time. Little bit too far back, but he's going to go for it down the inside. Has he outbraked himself? Yes, he has. Lewis Hamilton comes back into the lead once more. And Mercedes are going to make it back-to-back 1-2s. It's Lewis Hamilton who once again wins the Grand Prix. Hamilton triumphs in Bahrain from his teammate Nico Rosberg, and it is smiles all round of both celebration and relief in equal measure. They're waiting to start the podium party down at...
Great race.
Great race, absolutely. But that was two drivers fighting fair but on the limit. And that was the sort of start, but we knew the whole season was going to pan out somewhat like that, or at least the next few years were going to pan out like that. But for me, it wasn't the same as 2009. We had the budget, we had the income, we had the team behind us, and the car just got stronger and stronger. For me, 2014, we had a power unit that was stonking, and across 15, 16, 17, 18, we became better and better on the chassis side. And I think I can only speak on behalf of myself. I became better as well, and I think we were very fortunate in 14 to have such a dominant car, because that didn't last. The gaps got smaller, and yet the team results, if you look at them, are nearly as good. And I think that's a part of it, that we all improved as well, and we are continuing to improve.
Toto has spoken in the past about the animosity between Lewis and Nico. Did that ever spill over among you guys in the garage?
Well, I mean, there were never any proper squabbles. There was a little bit of fighting over desk space because they'd sit opposite each other, so the laptops would get pushed forwards and backwards. And there were a few moments, but we sort of inherited this rivalry that goes back to the days when they were in go-karts. Those sorts of issues with drivers are just part of motor racing when you've got kind of two together.
Yeah, but this was extreme, that's for sure. And part of our role, leading the race team, was to ensure that they stayed competitive in the garage and they wanted to beat each other, but not to the point that it got messy between the greater good of the team.
I think the engineering and the crews as well actually sort of consolidated together, because the feeling was, look, we've made this amazing car with this amazing power unit. We want to see it succeed, and we don't want to see it jeopardised by sort of, either one of you deciding that it's more, their outcome is more important than the outcome for the constructor. We grew stronger from that.
Given what Lewis has gone on to achieve, Do you think Rosberg gets enough credit as a racing driver?
I don't. His work ethic was incredible. He learned a great deal from Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. He learned, because he was the guy who was alongside Michael when Michael came to us, and he very astutely identified that Michael, what the successful aspects of Michael's behaviour were, which is work hard, be nice to everybody, shake everybody's hand, learn everybody's name, be involved. Because as he learned from that, then he took that on through the next few years when Lewis joined us. And I would agree with Ron. I think he was better than we probably tend to remember.
Was Rosberg better at some things than Lewis?
This is on track. We're talking.
The silence is deafening.
If I could probably add to this, just only through looking through the data, if you give Nico 1,000 laps, he slowly iterates towards an incredible performance level. If you give Lewis 2, he's there, if that makes any sense. So where Nico is excellent is if you give him time in the car to see what his teammate's doing, he's incredible at what he achieves. So to answer your question, that's where he was good. He could continuously adapt and evolve if he had sufficient amounts of time under his belt. That doesn't mean he was poor in changeable conditions, just that's where his true strength lay between the two.
And Rosberg was very good at Monaco.
He was incredibly good at Monaco and
amazing. Was it 3 on the trot?
Yes! World champion! Brilliant! Nico, you are world champion.
I'm so proud of you. You did amazing. Woohoo! We did it! We did it!
Were you guys caught out like we were at the end of 2016 when he says, "I've had enough. I'm out of here"?
Yeah, because Toto called us into the office, and we didn't really know what to expect. But if Toto said, "List 5 things that you think I might be about to say," Nico retiring wasn't on that list. And it was just a bizarre moment. And even now, it's kind of quite hard to work out why he decided to, just ask to be released from his contract. Because even if he wasn't going to beat Lewis again, he was in a good car. He'd be winning races. He'd be part of a team that was doing something amazing. But there must have been, very personal reasons for it, and he'd obviously achieved what he wanted to. But yeah, big shock.
Lewis Hamilton, I feel we haven't spoken enough about him, given what he's achieved with you guys. What makes him so brilliant?
Natural talent. He's got an incredible work ethic as well, but he is the whole package. He can't find any weakness in Lewis. Over time, he's just got stronger.
Where's he got stronger?
It's not one area, it's the fact that every time he doesn't win a race, he goes and works out why he didn't win it, and why the next time that happens, he'll win it instead of whoever else did. And it's this kind of relentless understanding and improving process that he goes through that I think must be quite exhausting, because it never really stops. But as Ron said, he just keeps getting better and better, and he's obviously broken all records, but to see a driver who's achieved so much still working for every win like it's their first, which is really what he does. But you can see why he is where he is, and it is down to hard work, dedication, and just this relentless urge to keep winning.
James, is he a strategist's dream in that whatever you concoct in the middle of a race, he can deliver whatever you need?
Whatever mistakes James makes, Lewis is able to fix them.
I mean, for clarity.
That's how I read that as well.
Yeah. Lewis, I need 18 qualifying laps from you now. He's just going to deliver.
Where his strengths lie, so Shov summed it up brilliantly. He never gives up, ever. You don't see his head drop in the race. He doesn't think, I'm 12th, I'm going to give up now. He just wants to know what's ahead of him, how to keep fighting. In fact, often we're the ones that have to tell him, you need to just accept where you are now, because what's in front of you is just not achievable anymore. And that strength is what allows you, even when you're on the back foot, to push forward and fight his way through. There were so many races that all of us have been privileged to have with him where he's not the leading car out the two, and he's the one fighting tooth and nail at the back, and he'll give everything to you. He's not going to back off, he's not going to give down. He may be frustrated and upset that you've made a mistake and put him into a situation that's difficult, but he delivers on it, and that's what he's done in all the time that we've been with him.
I always think you sound like the headmaster. Whenever we get on the radio, Lewis, it's James, you just think, oh God, what's coming now?
I think, yeah, I mean, Sadly, that's what it's been attributed to. But it's normally, I mean, if we take the last example, which was Austria last year.
Valtteri, this is James. The gearbox issue is critical. Please stay off the curbs, both cars. Copy.
You wouldn't believe it, but we were, I don't know the unit to use, seconds, kilometers away from failing those cars. And that they weren't simply, they're racing drivers. And as soon as they see the other one in front of them doing slightly more, they'll do slightly more again. And they'll iterate themselves into a loop where those cars were going to stop. Every now and again, it needs just a little bit of correction on things. But fortunately, I don't speak very often.
And is Lewis an inspirational character? You say, James, that you've got better over the years. Is it because the ethos to improve permeates down from the top, from Lewis, from...
So first of all, we are definitely incredibly privileged to have a leadership that acts in the same way as they talk. So in other words, there is a no blame culture, and there's a culture of accepting that you need all of those around you. And that permeates from Toto absolutely within the team and the environment. And we are led by, in all the time that I've been in the sport, the best TP that you could imagine, really. In terms of Lewis and what he brings to the party, they're all different. Every single driver and what they've brought is different. As we all discussed, Michael brought his strengths to it, Nico brought his strengths to it, Valtteri brings strengths to it in a different way as well, and Lewis brings his own set of strengths. And I don't think it's one individual, I think it's how they form together in the culture we've created here. That's why we are who we are today and how we work together. So what I mean by that is one individual isn't strong enough to completely change the dynamics of thousands of people that are building this car.
Did Lewis fit into the culture here immediately, or has he had to adapt? Have you seen him adapt?
Oh, he's definitely, I'll speak on my behalf only because I can't talk on behalf of others, but he's a very different character to the character that joined us. When he joined us, he was a mercenary. He was here for himself to win races. That desire to win hasn't disappeared, but what he's realised is you do it with a team and as a part of a team, and you become the greatest sportsman that exists as the result of it. One individual can't do it by himself.
Shov, how have you seen him change?
As James said, I think early on, he was this sort of relentless desire to win every race would manifest itself in his driving, and he would just be pushing and pushing and couldn't stop, and I think now he's just becoming a much more calculating driver. He's from the first lap of the first race, he's thinking about championships, he's thinking about looking after the car and the tyres a lot more. And as much as he hasn't got any better at losing races because that's just in his nature, certainly his approach to the weekend and his thinking in the car and everything is just becoming really calculated and clean and clinical, to the point where, if someone asks you about Lewis making mistakes, you're thinking back, and you're going back seasons often to try and recall the instances where it happens. He's just getting, his target is perfection, and that's a difficult target to pick, but that's what he's trying to achieve.
And if we think back to the Sakhir Grand Prix last year, Lewis unfortunately has COVID and George Russell comes in. There's no doubt that George Russell is a very fast racing driver, but he's at the very start of his career. Is there one thing that you can pinpoint that you missed from Lewis that weekend?
Difficult, because Lewis wasn't there to do the weekend, and the weekend played out very similar. The run plan for the drivers was the same as it would have been for Lewis, and it was a different track. But Lewis's natural talent makes him adapt very, very quickly to a track. His pole position rate's very high, so you would have presumed he would have been on pole, and you would have presumed he would have had a good start, and he would have led the race, because that's what he does most of the time. But George did a fantastic job that weekend, but you'd have to presume, having seen what Lewis has done for the past decade, he would have been down the road a little bit.
We made some concessions, didn't we, through the weekend for George being new to us. So, he hadn't had a lot of time in the car with us, and we therefore didn't try and overload him with things that we'd like to have got done, procedures and test items that we would perhaps have felt we could have engaged with Lewis in the car. We thought, well, actually that needs to take a back seat whilst we make sure George is comfortable in the car. So it was a little bit more difficult.
The last thing I did just want to touch on was, I've made a note here and I've written down awesome foursome. You guys have worked together for 20 years, and I just wanted to talk about your relationship, because you are also like on the pit wall. I am looking at the Mercedes pit wall. Who else? It's you four, and
it's a four-man now.
So it is you four. I am looking at the pit wall. How lovely. How strong is the bond between you?
Not that strong.
I think one really handy thing is we've all made all the same mistakes and all made all the same good decisions. You've got this reference where we only need to say, oh yeah, but remember Spa, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I remember that, let's not do that one again. And it's quite good at avoiding mistakes. You can communicate quite quickly because we all kind of know how each other is. And I think if we didn't get on, we wouldn't all have been together for the last 20 years working together. There would have been some cracks starting to show. But you think it's not. You've got to like the people you work with in this industry. So
there were a lot of very challenging years in that 20. And it's not to say they're easier now necessarily, but some of those times we went through that you talked about, or we've all talked about, were massively formative, and you remember them forever.
And how does it feel for you guys to be, I mean, it doesn't so much apply to you, Ron, I don't think, but for you guys to all be senior members of staff now, how do you reflect on the guy that joined in 98, 2001, etc.?
I mean, to be honest, you just think of it as being part of a team, and we've got the jobs, we try and do the jobs as best as we can, but there's so many people that have led to this team being successful that it's difficult to not count the enormous sort of input that everyone's made. I remember when I arrived on day one thinking that this all looks very new and exciting, and all my experiences are at this team. I've never worked anywhere else, but it is just nice to have been part of this phenomenal journey.
Are you ever going to work for someone else? Are you intrigued to know how other teams do it?
I think it's fair to say that we had opportunities to, and we haven't, and there's good reason behind that. This is family. 20 years of your life. We have more dinners together than we will do with our respective partners, no doubt about it. You have trust and faith in each other, but complete trust and faith. And perhaps contact is all you need to understand what that person's thinking and where you are. And I, for one, would miss all of that if I wasn't here. And I think that's a bond that you just simply can't generate in the same way. You need the group of individuals that are at the same position and level to have grown into that together. And that's the journey we've all been on. And it's one that I cherish, frankly, most days.
Have you made some pacts that you're all in or you're all out?
No. I don't think we certainly haven't done that. But speaking as the elder member of the group, I think we all know what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and we all know what's expected of us when we do our day job. But outside of the racetrack, we all get on so well. We generally eat with each other in the evening and have a crack, and there's lots of anecdotes about different championships and things we've done and what our families have been up to. So it's not like work, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to be with these guys and everyone else in the garage.
I think also I was going to say that I think it's a bit, the pit wall is the bit of the operation that's on telly when we win and lose on Sunday, but it's such a massive organisation. It's sort of wrong to fixate on what happens on Sunday afternoon. We've been handed this fantastic PU that was absolutely instrumental in 2014 and the subsequent years, and the factory have made a fantastic car for us to operate with, so it makes us look good on Sundays, and there's teams up and down the pit lane who'd look just as good if they were handed the same car.
Ron, you said numbers dropped to about 450 in 2009. Before you started having to take into account the budget cap, what did they climb to? What were you at your peak in terms of numbers?
Currently?
Yeah, or pre-budget cap, I don't know.
Pre-budget, it's just sub 1,000 potentially in Brackley. I couldn't tell you exactly what it is at Brixworth because they have many different projects on the go there, not just Formula One, FE, road car things.
Right. Finally from me, I want from each of you, favourite driver you've worked with. Ron, let's go down the line from you.
Michael Schumacher, but mainly because I was in awe of him before he arrived, and when he left the team, I was even more in awe of him, just the way he behaved and how he treated all the team members.
Shove?
I mean, I'd second Ron's comments, but I can't leave Jenson out, can I? And I sort of, as an engineer, I was learning on the job very much with him, and just a lot of happy memories and funny moments. But that was quite a long long relationship. So yeah, really enjoyed that, especially seeing him win the championship in 2009 was big.
Simon?
Is Lewis listening to this? Does he listen to your podcast?
We've done one with him.
I would say...
We'll find out. Say something and we'll find out.
Find out. Yeah. I would say either Michael Schumacher, and not just because, that's a sort of a common theme. It really is genuinely true. He was really, really impressive when we worked with him. But before that, I was great friends with the guy that I was engineering in WRC, and I had he was a great mate of mine, Richard Burns, and we went on to win the World Championship before I stopped doing that. And great loss.
And James?
I actually had the same. Does Toto listen to this? Because for me, Toto Wolff, best racing driver I have the opportunity to work with. But if he doesn't listen to this, on the other hand, I'd mirror Michael. I had a perception that was entirely wrong of him before he joined. I thought he was arrogant. I thought he was cold, because that's the impression you got. It took a few minutes before you realised that that's not true whatsoever at all. And then his greatness truly shone in that period that we were all with him. And I think it's fair to say we all learnt a huge amount, and we are different as a result.
Favourite car that you've worked on? Let's start with you this time, James.
I mean, thank God I never work on the car, because I assure you it won't get out the garage. But favourite car that I was able to play around with, it was probably the 2019 car. That was a fierce fight for the championship, and the closest there were just up and down moments throughout that entire season. The car was more predictable. We'd learnt a lot by how to use it by then, and it was a different era of the sport. And that's the one I think that stands out in my mind as one I enjoyed the most.
Simon?
I was trying to think then when James was talking, and I can't decide whether to go for the Brawn GP car, which was fantastic. And when we look at it now in the flesh, when it runs at Goodwood, it's tiny and it's completely different to where Formula One is now. That was a great car, but I'd probably go with the 2014. The beginning of the hybrid era was a monumental piece of work, and I loved every minute of it.
Shub?
I probably kind of fall into a similar camp to Simon, because you've got your emotional attachment to that Brawn car, knowing what it took to actually get that thing to the racing circuit, to get it to win a championship, and just the amount of sort of blood, sweat and tears that went from so many people into that in a year when we had to fight for survival. But then the recent cars, just technologically they're mind-boggling, hugely complicated, probably too complicated. But for me, I think in that regard the 2014 car was just such a nice bit of kit, so well conceived, and the credit goes to all the people at the factory who schemed it out, designed it, developed the aero, created the phenomenal power unit. But it was just a brilliant exercise in getting it right first time, and a good testament to what we can do as a team.
And Rod?
Unfortunately, ditto. I think the 2009 Brawn car, because of the emotional side of that season, but for engineering excellence and delivering on promises, the 2014 car was just an amazing piece of kit, and it came out and it just crushed everybody.
And if we did this in 12 months' time, you'd all be saying the 2021 car, right?
I thought he was going to say the Metro 6R4 or something.
The WRC, yeah.
No, that wasn't a very impressive car.
We agreed on that. Fond memories.
The Reynard Indy car, no.
That wasn't so bad the year I was doing it.
I drew some of that.
It was a turd, that one.
No, not the one that was a turd.
Guys, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed just reflecting a little bit maybe over the last 20 years. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
It's hard not to love these guys, isn't it? They epitomise team spirit and determination. And after listening to them for an hour, I've learnt more about why Mercedes has had so much success. And they're very funny, aren't they? I mean, Ron calling a car a turd, we all know what he means, don't we? Guys, thank you very much for your time. It was great to catch up. And let's hope this season turns out to be as close as the Bahrain Grand Prix suggested. I would absolutely love to hear any thoughts you have on that chat and whether you've ever encountered any of the Brackley boys. Reading through your comments is one of my favourite things to do, so send them in to me at Tom Clarkson F1 or use the hashtag F1BeyondTheGrid, and remember, I'll read out the best ones next week. Which brings me on to what you sent in about Kamui Kobayashi. After last week's show, there were some crackers, of which here are a few. Seabear got in touch to say, I met Kamui in the paddock of the Daytona 24 Hours this year. I was lucky enough to be one of the few that got a VIP pass to the pits during the race, and I got to meet him soon after he got out of the car at the end of the race. It was an amazing experience. Wow, I bet it was, Seabear. And of course, Kamui finished a close second in that race, proving his undoubted talent once again. Dr. Max Davison had this to say, I loved watching Kamui's overtaking skills in Formula 1. My son used to refer to them as ninja attacks, and I loved his Kamui baseball cap. What a pity he didn't get a top-tier race seat in Formula 1. While Kamui was a very exciting driver to watch, wasn't he? He was always up for it and never had an off day. It makes you wonder how many more podiums would have been possible with the top machinery he's since enjoyed in sports cars. And Craig Taylor said, interesting fact that Kamui Kobayashi finished 9th in his first Grand Prix, just like Yuki Tsunoda did in Bahrain. But in 2009, points were only awarded to the top 8 drivers. Well, that's a good spot, Craig, thank you. And if we're ever looking for a researcher on Beyond the Grid, I know where to come. Well, I've absolutely loved reading those, thank you, and I really hope you've enjoyed today's episode as well, and please keep sending over your feedback because we love it. I'll be back next week with another great personality, singular, from the world of Formula 1, so speak to you then. Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 in association with Audio Boom. Until next time, keep it flat out.